Welcome to Wired Smarter, where we're mapping out the ever-evolving relationships between humans and machines. I'm Ben Flanagan from Wired. Digital disruption is a phrase bandied around rather a lot, perhaps a bit too much, but it describes how our lives have changed in myriad ways, from how we order a pizza or watch TV to broad shake-ups in healthcare and commerce. These changes are going to get ever more radical and pervasive. Our lives will be transformed as machines collect and crunch more and more of our data, whether we like it or not. We're seeing leaps forward in fields like quantum computing, and a revolution in cryptocurrency is happening right before our eyes. But as the pace of digital disruption accelerates, things will be anything but plain sailing. Take how we pay for goods in the crypto revolution. Virtual currencies of today are notoriously volatile and have been subject to numerous breaches and scams. Quantum tech, meanwhile, promises computing power we could barely have imagined just a few decades ago. But that's a double-edged sword too. Quantum threatens to smash security and encryption systems like you use on your phone every day. All of this is on the agenda at today's Wired Smarter event, which was held with the support of our partners, Google and NEOM. We have expert speakers across each of today's 3 panel sessions. Later, we'll be discussing the potential of quantum computing and the future of crypto. But our first panel, coming out right now, focuses on how we can balance privacy with huge rises in demand for our data. Welcome to our first Wired Smarter discussion of the day. We're here to discuss the hyper-connected age that's just around the corner, or arguably already here. Promises super smart cognitive cities that proactively respond to our demands. There'll be autonomous transport, AI doctors giving us daily checkups, and social media networks that know us better than we know ourselves. All of this rests on a single thing. In one word, data, and I suppose in more than one word, lots and lots of data. But as we've seen over the last decade or so, many of today's networks have fallen woefully short in how they use and secure individuals' information. Legislators around the world are very much taking note of this. For example, Facebook, rather warily, is anticipating that up to 14 new privacy regulations will go into effect globally this year. I think this brings up 2 key questions. First, will these new laws protect us adequately? But also, on the flip side of that, will they allow for all these truly beneficial technologies that we've been promised? Smart cities, transport, health, networking, across multiple sectors. Will they allow them to happen as expected, as promised, or will they hold them back? So yes, we need to talk about data and privacy, and today we're here to do exactly that. I'll introduce our wonderful panel now. We have Joseph Bradley, who is Head of Technology and Digital at NEOM in Saudi Arabia. Hello, Joseph.
Hello, how are you?
We have Salim Ideh from Google. He is Head of Public Policy and Government Relations in the Middle East and North Africa region. And last but not least, Shant Oknayan, who is General Manager for Global Business Solutions at TikTok in the Middle East, Turkey, Africa, and Pakistan. That's quite a big territory you've got under your belt there, Shant. So anyway, welcome all, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Let's get straight into it. Joseph, I'd like to turn to you first, sure, if that's okay. We've most of us have read about NEOM and the hugely ambitious city with carless streets and more robots than people that is planned in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. Interestingly, under the plans for what's called a cognitive city, you're looking to harness 90% of all available data of NEOM as a development. Tell me, how do you plan to protect this data and people's privacy as you collect probably an unprecedented amount of information?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that is inherent in the whole entire design of NEOM and design of the city is to put the individual at the center of that. And so in all of our thinking and everything that we've done, we've really placed that right, that value at the core. And so when you think about data consent, most folks, the rules today say that, you should give every individual controls over their data. But that simply is not enough. And, that's typically most folks' kind of first line of defense, but that should be in actuality your kind of last line of defense. And so we've thought through a series of steps that we'll get into in more detail, but it starts with really data protection rights and establishing those. It moves on to second line of defense being data fiduciaries and establishing those. Then allowing individuals to assign consent proxies to handle and make sure that if they wish, they're not getting bombarded with 2,000 choices that they really don't have a choice for in the first place. And then the fourth area of defense is the actual individual rights themselves. And there we're focusing on giving individuals really a real-time single interface view of what is happening. It's not that the individuals have to go to all these services, but that the services actually come to the individuals. And then finally, making sure that we have a technology infrastructure that can quite frankly implement the policies that we want. So we kind of have this kind of 5-step approach to protecting and ensuring at the end of the day that citizens' information is protected.
That's super interesting. It kind of reminds me a bit of the move by Apple recently to change its policies and have people specifically opt in to certain services and privacy permissions, much to the concern of platforms like Facebook, for obvious reasons, does not help their advertising platform in any way. But I wondered, that I think that idea of just really presenting people with the options is super interesting and doing so in a clear manner. But I mean, do you think, Joseph and Salim and Shant, we'll come to you shortly, but do you think privacy is now people are now so wary about privacy? Do you think we've kind of gone a bit too far? Do you think it's so much in the public consciousness that it might be hard to persuade people to give over more of their data these days?
I think we have to be very careful of where we are in the world and what situations are. So I can tell you there's places in the world today where they want to be known. They want you to track them. Please know who I am. Make sure you know where I am, where I'm at, what I'm doing in the world. But I think, the answer is, if I told everyone, do you value your privacy? Everyone would say yes. But if I said, do you go to a grocery store and you put everything you're going to buy on a conveyor belt and everybody sees it? Why do you do that? Why would you do that? Or if you're in the US, you order a restaurant, you value privacy, yes, but you give your credit card to somebody you don't know, they go around the corner, they do whatever it is, they come back and they present you something and you sign it. I think that the point is that privacy is contextually based, in my opinion. It is directly proportional to the value someone perceives. And so one of the things that we have to do is give individuals real choice and be clear in terms of the intent and how that ties to the value that they are receiving. And if you do that, I think that it allows individuals true choice. And I think that the solutions that we're trying to create and fulfill will be able to be enacted. But I think as soon as you try to apply a single broad stroke of pen to every situation, it changes. I don't want you to know where my children are for safety reasons, but if there's an earthquake, I do. And so, again, these things are very dynamic. And so I think it's directly proportional to the value and the situation that an individual is in.
Very interesting. And I suppose, moving on to Salim, I think, what Joseph was saying there, Salim, was, they're building a completely new, essentially what is a country within a country over in NEOM. I suppose they, that comes with a certain advantage of being able to, see some of the problems that we've had before and implement a whole new regulatory system, to govern the new zone. But Google has been, dealing with our data for many, many years now. From your perspective, whose responsibility is this? Do you think the privacy regulations should be set by governments? Do you think the private sector should bear the responsibility here, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. This is a very interesting question. And building on what Joseph said, I think taking a leaf from Google's book is that we focus on users. So we learned, and now we know that if you put the users first, everything falls back into a good place. And that is precisely the case, even in the case in the subject of privacy. So privacy, if you look at what's happening today, this is, I would say, a unique set of circumstances. I think April 4th, 2020, I think Dubai came to lockdown. And we've had like 15 months of pandemic where we learned a lot. Okay, there's one thing for sure is that innovation hasn't stopped throughout. Okay, and innovation is important based on data and powered by data, and it actually allowed. Unfortunately, a lot of people, suffered during these last 15 months. However, some people did well. The people who suffered are mostly, I would say, individuals, small businesses, and people who are not ready to embrace digital. Digital was actually a lifeline for many businesses. We all connected with loved ones through digital. We continued to educate our kids. Universities were still functioning somehow, and certain sectors prospered, like fast-moving consumer goods. We all learned to shop online, and e-commerce increased, at least in the MENA region, by 50%. Why I'm saying all this? Because we learned something very, very important, I would say, is that data is center stage. If you want to have a resilient economy, if you want to survive in a time of crisis, you need to leverage the data in a smart, intelligent manner. At the same time, we learned something that we all knew, especially in the MENA region, that government is important, is critical. They managed, relied on governments to manage the pandemic, right? So here you have data that empowers people and accelerates transformation and brings good things. And this will not stop. Actually, it's going to be increasing in speed and innovation, and governments who actually are center stage. Now, third element is privacy, the one that we're all concerned with today. So it has always been a concern, as we all know, and I really like what Joseph said, that it is contextual. If you are you have a health crisis, you want people to know everything about you, especially the doctor that is treating you, but you don't want everybody to know where your kids are. Definitely, that is the case. So privacy has always been a concern, and now that the pandemic is sort of we have hopes of finding solution to the pandemic. Privacy is again at the forefront, and it's top of mind. Now, whose responsibility it is, to answer your question, in this very specific context, where we're in time of special times of I would say a little bit of a crisis. So this is where we believe that if we put the users first, we will actually come to the right conclusions. And obviously, government has to play an important role. So are private companies like the one that Chant represents or I represent today, or communities such as Joseph represents, and also the people sector, the users. So you have a public, private, people, a multi-stakeholder issue. And we all know when you have more than one stakeholder, things become slightly more delicate and you have to be far more considerate. And in this particular case, when it comes to data and privacy, you need the policies to be there. And policies, especially digital policies, it's uncharted waters across the entire globe today. So we're all trying our very best. And there must be a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, coupled with the recognition that digital policies have to be agile, meaning they need to change quickly. It's not like the old policies, because of this innovation that is going at an increasing speed. You need to have agile policies and adaptive policies that adapt.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, government is involved heavily, but needs to change with the times, right?
Yes, and yes, absolutely, because of the dynamic situation that data and innovation actually is imposing on all of us. Yet you have to be very responsible of what you're doing and respectful of the opportunity, because there is an amazing opportunity out there to empower people to innovate and continue creating opportunities for everyone, especially the young people, the data natives, the people who actually, for them, digital is not high tech. It's nature. It
comes naturally to them, of course. Well, I'd be thank you, Salim. I'd be very interested to get Chant's perspective on that, and what you see as the increased consumption of data, what kind of impact that might have on the regulatory environment, and whether you maybe expect more onerous legislation in the future.
So, look, if we were to take a step back, I think we all appreciate that data has increasingly become one of the most valuable assets in the world, right? And over the last few years, we've seen an exponential increase in data collection, consumption, and analysis, especially post-pandemic, where the reliance, as Joseph and Salim mentioned, on the online space has really increased exponentially, right? Now, with this accelerated increase on the digital world and the data that fuels it, this should be accompanied with unparalleled privacy safeguards. And we're seeing already that regulators and governments are strengthening their data protection and social media laws. I think there's a statistic, according to Gartner, whereby 65% of the world's population will have its personal data covered under a modern privacy law by 2023. And I think what that's an indication of is that we're not only looking to safeguard the digital population, but we're looking to build digital trust. I think that's what it boils down to. You know, alluding to some of the case studies or examples that Joseph raised, whereby you would definitely not share your data when it came to the safety and location of your children, but you would absolutely be open to doing so in case of an earthquake or, you know, medical records required for surgery. It boils down to trust. It boils down to how is that data being used, and how was it collected in the first place? So the world is witnessing this unprecedented change and challenge, and we do need to proactively work as an ecosystem, not just government, but also industry, as well as user focused groups in fostering digital trust, in improving how that data privacy is considered, and proactively putting the user again back in the driver's seat of what they decide to share and not share. And it boils down to trust and transparency with, yes, I'm willing to provide this piece of information because I see the value add it provides me, versus not knowing effectively what information is being captured or not. And the role of tech companies in particular becomes really important here. Tech companies are now mandated more than ever to not only implement those safeguards, you know, working together with government to do so, but to educate as well and to evangelize to their users and the digital population at large, what are these stronger privacy controls? Because the reality is most users do not have all of the knowledge related to how their data is being captured, what it's being used for, and grassroots education to create privacy literate users is top of mind and the role that tech companies need to play.
Yeah. Joseph, you're nodding your head a lot at what Shan was saying there. It's very, very interesting. And I guess your position, Joseph, is, as we touched on, distinct from Google and TikTok's, in that you're building, you know, a whole new regulatory system that will be completely separate from Saudi Arabia's laws and regulations, have its own system in NEOM. Tell me, as it does that, will that specifically include data and privacy legislation? And what's, you know, tell us some of the models you've drawn on for that and any mistakes that you may have learned from in other environments.
Yeah, so I think Shan was right completely. It does boil down to trust, and trust is a very, very fragile element that can easily be gained, but easily be lost and really difficult to gain. So when you think about, you know, what I see is what we've learned. I think one thing is to, you know, you have to think about those areas where you've seen things kind of go wrong, right? And lots of times it's not necessarily most of the examples have been thought about where you get individuals, you know, information and that information has been leaked or whatever, but you have to go beyond that. There's been cases where I think what we really learned that where the data has been anonymized, but yet the individual consent actually impacted the group's consent, which actually had societal impacts. And so an example of that, I think, is Strava. I think they had an application in 2017. It was a fitness application, right? And it was tracking all this information anonymously, and it was fine. Everybody agreed to it. And you said, yeah, you can track my information. And then they, without warning, they decided to show that information on a map. And what happened is one of the people that were using this quite a lot, this exercise app, was US soldiers. And unknowingly, when they displayed all this information, it actually showed pretty clearly where some secret military bases were, because you could see that people were exercising in these particular areas. And so the message is that we've learned, you know, really, really clearly is you have to protect and understand, individual rights, but it has to go beyond that. You have to build a regulatory and structured environment that allows individuals to truly, in order for them to trust, they have to understand, right? And understanding doesn't mean I'm going to give you 2,000 pages of end-user license EULAs. You just click yes, so I can engage. That's not what understand means. And so you have to provide them with real tools. As an example, consent proxies, right? So, hey, maybe there's I trust my doctor to provide, and I will adopt his or her consent when it comes to data and privacy or certain medical issues. Or maybe there's a church that I trust and I want to adopt their consent proxies on. But at any time, I can edit myself out of those, or I can change the rules associated with those. So the assignment of consent proxies is a great is a great example. I think another good example or a better. There's still some issues. There's no perfect example in the world. But I think Finland, what they've done with their Fin data, where they've again kind of created a separate institution with ethics boards to not only answer, how do we collect the data, but should we collect the data? I think that's one example of sort of this data fiduciary being established. Obviously, they're not perfect. They've got some criticisms along. I think the people can only opt out instead of opting in. But I think we've been able to look and see what has worked around the world and really design a system that is all encompassing to the best of our abilities and truly, Shen says, gives an individual an ability to trust by first ensuring that they actually understand what they are truly opting in or opting out of.
Okay, so will that will be part of the legislation or
Yes.
NEOM? So that will be formal laws or
absolutely. So there's formal laws, the Data Privacy and Protection Act that'll be established as a Data Protection Authority and Administration that's established. And then more importantly, though, which I think we don't talk a lot about, you can have all these laws, but you have to be able to implement them. And and so the sort of our last line of defense is we have a huge advantage in actually creating an infrastructure that allows us to implement policy at the edge, right? It's truly intelligence. We have a common data platform across every single industry that's doing business in NEOM. And so, if you make a policy that says, I want to strip off data here or never collect data there, we can implement that policy once and apply it everywhere, which I think is obviously a huge advantage. And so how we think about, we have the benefit of learning from many of my peers that are on the call today and designing a purpose-built environment that understands that fundamentally the value of the world is built no longer really on physical assets, but on the ability to understand the frictionless exchange of information. So it's a huge advantage that we have. It's a huge responsibility. It's a huge task because it keeps us up every day. But that's the challenge and the opportunity that we have at NEOM. Okay,
and presumably you'll be working with companies like TikTok and Google at some future point. But Celine, your job at Google is to deal with governments and regulatory bodies on policy issues. I'd love to get a kind of fly on the wall kind of insight into what kind of things are on the agenda with some governments in the Middle East region. What do you talk about? Just a blunt question. What kind of things are preoccupying your time these days?
You're actually, these are very interesting conversations we have, and they're, I would say, unique conversations, especially in this a very special time we're going on through. But just before that, I just want to say, that people they say they want to innovate, and they say yes, let's find something new, and then second question they ask you is, where has this been done before, right? If it's innovation, it's probably was never done anywhere else before. It is uncharted waters, and we as platforms, as private sector, who were there and we created platforms. So we were in a situation where we could not wait for legislation and policy to happen. So we chartered our own sort of course, and we have, as an example, the YouTube guidelines or the AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning principles, and we held ourselves to very standards that respect again the users, very, very central. So coming with this baggage to a conversation with a government is quite an interesting discussion that happens, and I must say that the governments today, they get it, they understand the value of data. And I'll quote a couple of ministers who were on a public forum like this one. And one minister said, if we learned something during the pandemic, is that we were forced to stay at home, and all of a sudden we had the entire world at our fingertips, meaning, and that is a very important minister that achieved a lot of things, and meaning they came to the realization that data is actually transformative. It's disruptive and transformative in a constructive manner. At the same time, the other minister on the same panel said something fascinating. She said, the pandemic humbled us when it comes to digital policies, because we realized we're not really ready. So for full-blown digitization, like the one we all sort of been advocate for at different lives of our career, etc. So taking all these into consideration, you have some really interesting conversations with government officials. I must say they are fully aware, they're fully well sort of informed. It is not easy to make this transition from a rather past of rigid policies that change only once every 10 years to actually to digital policies, to the dynamic new normal that's settling in, if I can use these expressions all in one sentence without oxymorons. It is quite a challenge, and I must say, in a lot of the cases, we have seen the right people come to the forefront and having constructive conversation. The jury is still out. We're in the midst of a lot of very interesting conversations.
I mean, obviously, Google has, in some other markets, grappled with, sort of quite restrictive legislation on data and privacy in Europe, for instance. Do you worry that there may be a repeat of that in some of the markets you cover in the MENA region? Do you see any sign of that?
Well, there is always a danger, of course, not only in MENA, it's everywhere that there can be some restrictive policies. I must share with you that they've been extremely cautious the way they're progressing, and they're benefiting from other people's missteps and some of the good best practices. Yet they have to leapfrog, because this is a unique opportunity. They understand the opportunity that this represents for them. Like Joseph is creating a brand new city on a blank white canvas. So, they understand the opportunity and they want to get it right.
Good answer. I'd love to hear Shant's perspective on that as well. I mean, obviously, TikTok has come under fire for alleged privacy violations in certain markets and previously. But I mean, tell me, I mean, do you see in the Middle East region or one of the many other territories that you cover, Shant, having to kind of address public opinion more? Like, I know you have transparency centers in Europe where TikTok looks to, open the discussion about what data there is out there. What's your perspective on that? Do you think we're going to see these transparency centers in the regions you cover?
So to give a little bit more context on these transparency centers and transparency reports that we issue, I think, again, it goes back to the digital trust paradigm that we were discussing earlier. And the job is never done in building digital trust, and safety and privacy are a top priority for TikTok and many other platforms. But as we go through the motions of building better safeguards and empowering and educating and evangelizing to our users how they can proactively decide what information is shared, what we call zero-party data, we also need to then measure those efforts, and that's where transparency comes into play, right? So because that transparency enables us then to continuously improve our guidelines, policies, safety and privacy tools to better safeguard our community. So what these transparency centers are that we have in the US and in the EU, it's a look under the hood in terms of our practices around content moderation, around data security, around content recommendation. And it's open to industry experts and policymakers, so both government and private sector, to get a feel of, well, are we putting our hand where our mouth is in terms of implementing these safeguards and community guidelines that we have listed as top priority? Now, to answer your question of, are these realities that will come to the Middle East and the broader area? We don't have any plans in the near future. But as I said, there's no finish line when it comes to privacy and safety efforts. And we're committed to deepening that engagement. So, and to continue earning the trust of our community and policymakers and the broader public. So we'll see what the future holds, but these transparency centers are available in different parts of the world. And we also do issue what we call transparency reports. So these are biannual reports that list across the world and for this region as well, the type of content that we may have removed, both the volume and the nature of those removals, how we've responded to law enforcement requests for information, how we've responded to government requests for content removals and IP protection and things of the sort. So all of this to say that transparency and how you showcase, how you're measuring your efforts around privacy is just as important as those policies and the endeavors from a community perspective in the first place.
Sure, very good answer. I guess, Shant, at the end of the day, obviously there are a lot of concerns around privacy and data, but at the end of the day, giving people services that they want. I mean, you've only got to look at the explosion of TikTok use over the last couple of years to illustrate that. So lots of problems along the way, but then at the end of the day, these are services that really actually benefit human beings without being too soppy about it. I'd like to take that point to Joseph though, because Joseph, what you're doing at NEOM is, promises a lot. Anything from, AI-powered healthcare that will, I think, extend the lives of citizens there by 10 years. I read in Wired, actually. But also other things like OS for the entire city and autonomous transport, all of which hinge on huge amounts of data, some of it quite sensitive. But I would like to take, a positive there in terms of giving citizens what they want. What at NEOM, Joseph, do you excite you the most about how you're going to use data to transform people's lives for the better?
What I get really excited about is I tell my team all the time, I don't worry about what I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time, trying to, project, what the future will hold, but I enjoy very much in challenging what we believe to be true. And one of the things that most cities are fundamentally built around is this notion of time. I mean, time controls, how long does it take you to get from point A to point B? I mean, that kind of like governs your whole kind of life on what experience you can share. And so what's incredibly exciting is to be able to look at what if I could remove time from your element of consideration around what you can accomplish in a city, around what you can do, around who you can interact, around where you can go. And so the whole, concept of collecting information and being predictive and proactive is built around, you get from one side of the line to the other in less than 20 minutes. You're within a 5-minute walk to wherever you want to be. There are no lines. There is no traffic congestion. So, this notion of time, I think, of removing that is really super exciting. Another thing that I would not have thought about, but after all of us have lived the last year and a half with COVID, I mean, think about how much friction has been introduced to our lives. I mean, whether it's, masking up, give me your temperature, show me your paperwork, show me you're vaccinated. My God, just going from a simple flight, has turned into a full on, I'm going to court and I got to prepare a whole set of documents, right? So to get back to frictionless travel and the ability for me to say, yeah, I want to go somewhere and pick up my luggage. The last time I see my luggage is next time I see it is when I'm actually checking into my hotel room and there it is, right? Because they know where I'm going. They know what flight I'm on. They know where my hotel is. And so what super excites me is to get back to us being human, to the ability for us to just simply interact and communicate and talk with one another, which I think, quite frankly, I know I took for granted. And I never thought that could ever be, taken away. And I think all of us have been on the Zoom calls and the WebEx calls with family members that you haven't seen in 30, 40 years, but everybody's just clamoring to talk with you. So that's what gets me most excited about what we're doing with this information is quite frankly, not taking away humanity, but actually putting it back in to who we are as a people. So I'm super excited about that.
Very human answer. I like that a lot, Joseph. We're nearly out of time, but I'd like to, if that's okay, just pose one last question to you all. In terms of, we talked a lot about, that balance between privacy and data collection. I know, Shant, you said that there's no finishing line in maybe striking that balance correctly. But I would like to ask you all, maybe Salim, you could take this first, to round up. How far down the road are we in terms of at least getting that balance a little more stable amid all the headlines about privacy violations and misuse of data? How far down that road do you think we are? Do we have any hope of not solving, but at least rebalancing this soon?
So we are already, must say that we should recognize that what has been achieved so far is quite considerable in terms of if you put on one hand the economic benefits that we're getting out of data versus the privacy risk. I think we're doing quite well in general. Specifically, when you give the user, you respect the user data, and you give it, you give the user the choice to actually customize what data they want to share and what data they want to keep. The economic benefits are humongous. I mean, really very, very important. Just to give you an idea, we tried to measure for 3 countries in the MENA region: UAE, Saudi, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. What are the economic benefits of the Google products? We just brought a company called Public First in the UK, and they measured its. They estimate to be 10 billion riyals for Saudi Arabia per year, and 10 billion dirhams for the UAE, and another 5 billion Egyptian pounds for Egypt, just from using search, maps, YouTube, and all that. So this is very important, and I want to get to your question, but just put in context what the same study was conducted in the UK, and the UK got like $78 billion worth of yearly benefits, which per capita is approximately much more important than what the UAE and Saudi is getting. And it's very comparable to what the US is getting. Why is that? I would submit to you that this is because of the policies and because of the digital literacy that exists within the country. So these two need to be taken into consideration. Now, to get to it is a uncharted waters. How far we are will really a lot depend on the ability to have government-led, public, private people sort of consultation with all the elements that I mentioned. However, we're there because we also have occupied the territory and came up with some kind of guidelines to help everyone. And transparency reports are one of them. You can access them anytime, and you know exactly how many requests we got from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, from the UK about content and everything. So I'm an optimist. I like to think we're not far, but we must also recognize that we are in the middle of a construction site in the MENA region, you know, and this is happening as we speak, like is the case with Joseph.
Absolutely. Sean, an optimistic view there. What's your take on it? Just in a minute or so answer, if you don't mind.
Sure. So look, the fact that we're having these types of conversations indicates that there's a shift, right? There's a shift to understanding ways to balance providing an impeccable consumer experience, depending on whatever you're solving for, whether it's time in NEOM or whether it's providing value for tech platforms like ourselves, balancing that with unrivaled safeguards, right? And it goes back to, again, empowering the user and educating them, but more importantly, understanding them from the get-go as to what matters to them. Because ultimately, if you're trying to build that trust and balance safeguards around data privacy and make sure the pendulum's not swinging too far and balancing that with impeccable consumer experience, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the user and understand what's important to them, give those the options, educate them on that, and then measure that you're actually delivering the promise that you made to them.
Very good. Joseph, I'll give the last word to you. I mean, on a related theme, I think what's happening at NEOM is often described as a sort of blueprint for other cities in the future in terms of urban development specifically. I mean, do you see some of the data and privacy guidelines and regulations that you're drawing up in a similar light? Could this be, replicated elsewhere, or aren't we quite there yet?
I do believe that we will be able to share and share with the rest of the world all the lessons that we are going to learn and that we have learned, and that I think it's important that we stay very, very humble, because this is we're very, very early in this journey. And I think one of the things that, we strive to do in NEOM, and I tell my team, is to make sure we understand the difference between being very fortunate in having a diverse environment and being one that is inclusive. I think in most of the world, you're now seeing a very diverse environment, a diverse meaning that you have people of different backgrounds and generations working on these problems. I think very few of us have achieved the level of inclusiveness that we want, meaning driving a full level of participation so everyone's voice is heard. That, I think, is what we're trying to do at NEOM. That's what we're trying to do. And that means not just listening to the people that are here, but that means listening to all of our global partners and all of our global peers, so that we can ensure that we are truly learning and providing the world with a living laboratory to really attack and really solve some of these problems. So, we're staying humble. I hope with the help of everyone around the world that we'll get it right, have confidence that we will, and only the future will tell, but I'm sure having a good time learning and doing it, and really enjoyed this panel and having a conversation with all my peers.
Great, I like that, living laboratory. So, well, later on in this Wired Smarter event, we're going to hear more about what might be tested out in a laboratory like this. We're looking at quantum computing and also the future of money. So stay tuned. But in the meantime, gentlemen, thank you so much for an illuminating discussion there.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.